We are going to see how to incrementally copy multiple SQL tables from a source to a destination. We already have a video in our channel which tells about how to perform an incremental load for a single SQL table. I recommend you to watch this video before watching the current video. It's because we are reusing the same pipeline now. And also I explained how to build this pipeline step by step in a great detail in this video. I'll also mention the video link in the description. Coming to the current scenario, think like we have multiple SQL tables and we need to perform an incremental load. Before that, let's test for a single SQL table. So I'm going to run the pipeline now so that we can see what exactly will happen for a single SQL table on a high level overview. In the source, we are going to create a table which is called the file source. So the only change which I done to this pipeline is in the copy data activity in the sink, I have changed the destination to a SQL database. Now let's look at the source and the destination. So this is our source database and we are going to create a file source table and we are going to insert 5 records. Let's just ensure the table is not created. So we inserted 5 records into the file source table. Now in the destination side, we are going to create the same table so that we can copy the records from the source to the destination. So we created an empty table and the table is empty. Let's also create a watermark table so that it will keep a track of the number of records inserted. And we are inserting a dummy value into the watermark table. So whatever the values which are having a date greater than this value will be copied from the source to the destination. And we need to mention the table name in which we are copying and the watermark date value. And we can see the table name and a dummy date value. Let's try to perform a load now. And currently we have the following data in the source and we have a watermark table in the destination. And the value of the watermark table is a dummy value which to have a date of some previous date. Currently we have the 5 records. So what exactly our pipeline does is it's check for the watermark table and it checks for the source. Whatever the records which are having a date value greater than this date will be copied to the destination. And it will change the watermark value to the last record's date value. At the end of the pipeline, we are expecting the watermark value to have this and all the rows should be copied from the source to destination. And we have our pipeline been executed. So let's try to query at the destination side first. This is the destination database. And we have 5 rows inserted and we are expecting the watermark table to have the last records value and we can see 2022 510. This is our last records information. Now we initially did an initial load. Now it's time to debug the pipeline again. Before that we need to insert few more records at the source end. Now think like there is another day and 2 records were inserted. Now if I perform the pipeline execution, I expect only these 2 rows to be inserted as an incremental load. Let's try to debug the pipeline again. Now what exactly pipeline does is, as we inserted these 2 records, now the pipeline will check for the watermark value. So it checks for whatever the rows which are having a date value which is greater than the current watermark value. So only these 2 rows will be inserted at the destination side. Let's check for the pipeline execution to be completed and we'll check for the number of rows inserted. And our pipeline is executed now. While we check for the copy data, we can only see only 2 rows were read and 2 rows were written, which means the incremental load is successful. And when we query for the file source at the destination, we can see all the 7 records. And also we expect our watermark value to hold this last records date. Great. So this is for a single table. Now we'll have a scenario in the live project or in a real world scenario. At the source we'll have a n number of tables. For that, to perform this we need to have parameters. So without the parameters the Azure Data Factory is entirely static. So let's try to clone this pipeline and let's add the name. So I explained the previous pipeline information in a great detail in the previous video, which I mentioned in the description part. Let's try to add two parameters here. First one is the table name and the second one is the watermark column. Think like I have many tables at the source end. So I have something like the music source, and I cannot expect the same record name should be for all the table headers. So it can be something like added date, and if I have another table which can be like a book source, and that can be change a date. So I need to have this date column as a parameter, and I need to have the table name as a parameter. So let's add two pipeline parameters here. First one is the table name and the second one is watermark column. So we are making the watermark column as a parameter. Let's implement these parameters in this pipeline. Now coming to the lookup, we can see it is just giving the first row in the watermark table. So if I have 100 tables here, I expect my watermark table to have 100 tables. So I have the music source, so my watermark table should have the music source and the watermark table. If I have the book source table, I expect my watermark to have book source table and its watermark value. Now I need to query the table name and its watermark value from the watermark table, where my table name is the one which I am going to pass in the parameter. Let's try to write a query for that. So I need to get table name watermark value from the watermark table, where my table name is the one which I am going to give in the parameter. Now if I try to preview the data, it will ask for the table name. I only have a single table for now, so I'll give the file source over here. So this query will bring up the table name and the watermark value. Now coming to the second activity, we have a lookup for a single file source table. So we also need to make this a dynamic one. We need to get the maximum date in that table. As I mentioned, we cannot have the same name for all tables. We are going to make this as a parameter. So select the watermark column as the latest watermark from whatever the table which I am going to give in the parameters. And coming to the copied activity, we need to also change the query here, and I explained how we got this query in the previous video. Now select start from the table name which I am giving in the parameter, where the watermark column is greater than the watermark's table value and it is less than its own latest value. And we no need to change for the store procedure as it is taking from the pipeline itself. Now let's try to add another table here at the source. So we are going to create a music source table at the source, and we are going to insert 4 records into it. So we already have the table created. Let's try to query that. And we have 4 records in that table. Let's also create the same table at the destination site. We already have the table, so let's try to query that. So it is an empty table. Now we need to expect our watermark table to have another record, which is the table name of my music source and some dummy value, so that while I'm doing an initial load, it will copy all the records. Now I have a second row, which is the music source and with some value. While I perform the run, it will ask me for two things: the table name and the watermark column name. So my table name is music source and the watermark column value is, let's try to query that. We can see the added date is my watermark column name. Let's try to debug and check. Okay, we can see there is an issue with the copy activity. Let's try to investigate that. We can see we given a hard-coded value in the destination. So as we are using the parameters, we need to make this pipeline in a dynamic manner. So we should not give any hard-coded value. Let's try to give the parameter which is having the table name. So I'll pass the table name from the pipeline parameter. So this is my table name and the parameter should be passed from the pipeline level. Let's try to debug the pipeline again, and this time it should work. And we can see the pipeline got executed successfully. So what exactly we done in this pipeline is our source have the 4 records and our watermark table at the destination. So whatever the value which is having the greater date than the watermark value will be copied to the destination. So now we expect the watermark table to hold the last record's value after the load. So when we insert few more rows, all the rows which are having a greater date value than this will be inserted to the destination. Let's try to query the destination table and see. And we can see 4 records were inserted. Let's also query the watermark table. And we have the watermark table with the updated value. Now at the source end, let's try to insert 2 more records into the music source. And let's try to re-execute the pipeline. So now we expect only 2 records to be inserted to the destination. And we can see our pipeline got executed successfully. Now as we inserted 2 more records at the source end, our pipeline will check for the current watermark value, and whatever the date which is having a higher date than this value will be inserted to the destination. So we expect only 2 records to be copied to the destination, and we can see only 2 rows were read and 2 rows were written. Let's try to query that from the destination. We can see all the records were copied and the watermark value should have 11/11/2022. Perfect. Now we are passing the parameters here whenever we execute the pipeline. Now coming to the real world scenario, we need not to pass dynamically every time. So let's try to create a parent pipeline which will check for whatever the tables we have at the source end, and it will pass the table value to the parameter. So let's try to create another pipeline which acts as a parent pipeline. Now in the parent pipeline, we are going to take a lookup activity. So we are creating a JSON file and it will just tell the table name and its corresponding watermark column. So we already have a JSON file. So I currently have only 2 tables in my source. The table name is the file source, so its corresponding watermark column is the last modify time. And also I have another table which is the music source and its watermark column is added date. So whatever the tables we have, we'll add them to the JSON file. So this is our lookup file. So I'll pass this file into the data lake. So we already have the data lake connector being created. So let's try to point to that. So we have already a data set which is pointing to the corresponding file. So let's try to preview the data for confirmation. So we have a file which is having the same content in which we have seen. Now for this, we need to iterate for each and every table. For that we need to use for each. Inside the for each, we need to add the child pipeline, which is incremental load parameters. For that we have an activity called execute pipeline, and we need to point out to that pipeline, and it is asking for please provide me the parameter values in which I need to do for the corresponding pipeline. So we'll get the values from here from lookup. So let's try to do a debug only till here and see. And we perform the debug, and we can see we are getting the values from first row, the table name, and the watermark column. We need not to check for the first row. We can uncheck that, and let's try to debug the pipeline again. And we got the value as value, table name, and the watermark column. So for the for each we need to give the values first. So I am telling the for each to read these values. So this will give the values, which is both table name and the watermark column. For the table name, I need to give current item dot table name, and for watermark column dot watermark column. So I got this information from here, from the debug activity. Let's try to rename this pipeline as a parent pipeline. Before that, let's try to empty all of our values and reinsert them again. So we are going to do a fresh start. So we are having the table and we are only inserting the first 5 records, and also similarly we are having a second table and we are only inserting the first 4 records, and we are expecting no values at the destination. So let's try to drop table and recreate it again. We are also deleting the watermark table and we are only inserting 2 records, which is holding a dummy date value. And let's also delete the music source, and let's try to recreate an empty table. Currently we have 2 tables which are having 4 or 5 records at the source, and at the destination we are having the table names and which is ready to accept the values. And we also have the watermark table which tells about the table names and a dummy watermark column. Let's try to execute this pipeline and let's see the load. And we can see the pipeline is executed now. So what exactly happens is at the source end we have 2 tables and a watermark table which is having a 2 rows which tells about the information about the tables. So first it checks for the watermark values. As we have the dummy values for both the tables, it will copy all the records from the source to the destination. So once the initial copy was done, it will update the corresponding last date value in each record. So the file source last value will be inserted to the watermark table, which is having a record for the file source. Similarly, it will do for the music source, and we are expecting these values now. Let's try to query the destination and check. Let's try to check for the watermark table now, and we can see the same values were queried. Let's also check for the tables. So we are doing a select, we have the 5 records as expected. Let's also check for the music source, and we have the 4 records. Now let's try to insert 2 records into each table, and we'll try to debug the pipeline again. So we are inserting 2 records into the file source and we are inserting 2 records into the music source. And let's try to debug the pipeline again. Now the pipeline should insert only 2 rows. And we can see the pipeline got executed successfully. Let's try to check for the copy data for execute pipeline. This copy data should only have the 2 rows read and 2 rows written. And also let's check for the another execute activity. Even this should have a pipeline which should read only 2 records, and it should only copy 2 records. And we can see only 2 records were read and 2 were copied. Let's try to query this at the destination. So we are querying the music source, and we can see all the 6 records were inserted. Let's also query the file source, and we can see all the records were inserted. Now if you query the watermark table, we can see the last values in the both tables will be updated to the watermark table, and we can see the same values were updated. So this is how we perform the incremental load for multiple tables from a source to a destination.